achieves the opposite.
Honourable Peter Dunn.
Mr Speaker, today is a red letter day for recreational hunters in New Zealand for a couple of reasons. First, there has been, and I think the member who just resumed her seat alluded to this in part, a measure of suspicion amongst many of them as to whether the Game Animal Council would ever eventuate. After all, it's almost a year since the bill was reported back to the House, and some of those advocates were deeply suspicious that that was as far as it would go. So today is important to give reassurance on that score. It is also important for them because, as the Minister said in his introductory remarks, this Game Animal Council effectively parallels for game hunting interests the role of fish and game in terms of freshwaters, fish, etc. So, for the first time upon the passage of this bill, we will have integrated approaches to the management of the major recreational sectors in New Zealand, and I think that is a very positive step forward. But, Mr Speaker, it has been a long journey, and I want to take some time this morning to rehearse some elements of that journey. In our 2005 Confidence and Supply Agreement with the then Labour government, there was a special committee established to review pest management issues. That committee was chaired by my former colleague and very good friend, the Honourable Margaret Austin, well known in this House. And when the Minister said earlier that this bill attracted 660-odd submissions, that is a fraction of what the Austin Committee attracted by way of submissions. There were 4,500 submissions to that committee, which met in the period 2005-8. And one of the strong recommendations that came forward from that committee was that there be a move towards the establishment of a Game Animal Council. So this morning, immediately, I want to acknowledge the work of Margaret Austin and her early committee in getting us launched on the journey. When the change of government occurred in 2008, we included in our 2008 and 2011 Confidence and Supply Agreements with the current government provision for, firstly, the work of the Austin Committee to be advanced, and second, as that happened, for the Game Animal Council to be introduced. What happened after 2008 was that an establishment committee chaired by Gary Ottman from the Game and Forest Foundation was set up to take those recommendations from the Austin Committee to start to develop the basis for a Game Animal Council. They consulted widely in New Zealand. They consulted with similar agencies in Australian states. They're not entirely comparable, but there were valuable insights to be gained from them. And by the time of the 2011 election, we were on the way to preparing the legislation that becomes before the House this afternoon. So I want to acknowledge the work that Gary Ottman, successive officers of the New Zealand Deerstalker Association, more particularly of recent times Tim McCarthy, but before him Alec McIver, and Bill O'Leary, who's been a constant advocate right throughout. I want to acknowledge the work that all of these people have done in bringing this proposal to the stage where, firstly, it becomes legislation, and secondly, it's about to be passed by the House today. Now, Mr Speaker, I listened to what I thought was a relatively constructive speech from Ruth Dyson. I don't agree with everything she said, and I think that some of the concerns that she expressed may well be dealt with once the Council is established. But I think there are some important points. I do not see the Game Animal Council being set up to be a competitor to DOC in that sense. Rather, I see it as part of the devolution of responsibility to a range of interests. And one of the things that strikes one when you look at the whole recreational sector in New Zealand is that it is not particularly well organised at this time. There are a series of responsibilities that sit in different places, not well coordinated and a little hard to understand. And one of the issues that the Game Animal Council will face will be to be the focal point for bringing together a lot of matters that relate to the game animal sector, the hunting sector in particular, but not just in terms of the physical act of hunting, but issues like the promotion of safety, and that brings into prospect the work that the Mountain Safety Council does and how they can be better coordinated and plugged into existing systems. Mr Speaker, the Mountain Safety Council is an extraordinary organisation. It's been around for 40-odd years, It doesn't actually formally report to anyone. It's funded on the basis of contracts from the public sector, the police, the search and rescue, etc. But it doesn't have a physical home. What it is crying out for is some form of integration with the work of agencies like the Game Animal Council. And, Mr. Speaker, the issue that has arisen over the time in tandem with this has been the question of what used to be known as heli hunting, now has the more grand title of assisted aerial trophy hunting. It's somewhat of a euphemism, I think, for what actually happens. And there has been a constant dispute between the recreational hunters and the purveyors of AATH services about whether the playing field was level. Mr. Speaker, as part of our confidence and supply agreement in 2011, there was provision for the phasing out of AATH through making restrictions to herding and hazing, etc. And when, as Associate Minister, I received the applications nearly 3 years ago from that sector, I made a condition of the permits that were granted that there be no herding and hazing, and they, having told me that this was a practice they never engaged in, promptly took me to judicial review for having put into their agreements the things they said they never actually engaged in. We won that position in court, but the issue arises again as these permits expire in February of next year. Mr. Speaker, the solution that will be proposed by way of SOP a little later today to effectively charge the Game Animal Council with monitoring the application of those provisions and then developing a code of practice is, I think, an elegant one. It's an elegant one for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it will resolve the issue that has caused so much tension. And second, it will ensure, and this is really the platform on which I believe the Game Animal Council needs to be launched, that the Council will have an effective role in terms of future issues that affect the recreational hunting sector. One of the great fears in the early days of this debate was that we were setting up an agency that would be a talk shop, that would do very little, that would have little connection to what was going on. The fact that we have been able to identify this particular issue as one that sits neatly within its purview is, I think, a good indicator of what will happen in the future. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are very complicated issues regarding access to land, and the member who preceded me alluded to those. There are always delicate issues regarding the quantum of hunting being allowed in particular sectors, and I'm aware of certain management plans that work well and others that are challenged by hunters who see other people from outside their particular geographic location coming in to steal their bounty, if you want to use that term. Mr. Speaker, the Game Animal Council will be in a much closer position to monitor, to regulate, to recommend, to cajole behaviour in those particular areas. And I think what we will see once this legislation is passed is not the fears that are understandable at the moment being realised, because this is new, but I think we will start to see, once the Council is appointed, and I think getting it up and running early in the new year is a priority, a process whereby for the first time we have a genuine forum where the issues that affect recreational hunters can be put on the table, can be debated and can be understood by conservation authorities, by the Department of Conservation, by the government and by Parliament as a whole. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a red letter day. It's a very important day for the recreational sector in New Zealand, and I think it sends a signal, and it's this. This was an unusual, perhaps unique, certainly not especially popular campaign when we began it way back in 2005. It was seen as a little quirky. The reality is that hunting is a mainstream issue for New Zealanders. And what this bill demonstrates is that by commitment, by tenacity, by perseverance, you can make change, you can achieve positive outcomes, and you can give a sport that is enjoyed by hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders a proper place and a way in which it can be recognised, its talents and its attributes respected, and the input of the people who partake in that sport to broader conservation policy given credibility. So, Mr. Speaker, I welcome the second reading of this bill. I'm looking forward to the debate that will ensue and for the bill being passed by this House hopefully a little later on today.
Moana Maki.
Thank you.